Coming up on this edition of Pinpoint Weather University, we're looking back at the winter season, talking about the highs and lows from this winter, including the back-to-back winter storms. We were overdue for it. We received our biggest winter storm in 20 plus years. We'll look at where that storm ranked and also talk about some of the record-breaking heat we received this winter. Plus, the roller coaster ride for temperatures coming to an end. We're starting to warm up. We'll preview the spring season, letting you know what to expect here in the Carolinas in regards to temperature and precipitation over the next 3 months. I'm meteorologist Brandon Lawson. Thanks for joining us on this edition of Pinpoint Weather University. Our show starts right now. Welcome into Pinpoint Weather University, my friends. I'm meteorologist Brandon Lawson here on Queen City News Plus. Always a pleasure to be with you every Wednesday or whenever you might be watching. We tape these every Wednesday here on Queen City News Plus, and we also want to welcome in our YouTube viewers, Facebook, Instagram, wherever you might be seeing some of our reels. Always a big thanks to you for keeping this thing going. Again, Pinpoint Weather University talking about climate and weather, not just here in the Carolinas, although we talk about it mostly in the Carolinas, but I do talk about some of the national climate and weather going on around the nation and also around the world too when it comes down to some of that stuff. So I do want to talk a little bit about the winter season that was here across the Carolinas. It was a crazy one, folks. We're talking about winter storms back to back and also record-breaking heat as well. And it was one that I think many folks will be remembering for quite some time. Looking at some of the main headlines when it comes down to this past winter, we had the warmest Christmas on record here in Charlotte. Then we had those back-to-back winter storms in late January, 2 weekend winter storms that kept us at home, kept the bread off the shelves, and also the milk and eggs too. It was quite a showdown when it came down to the winter season as we closed out the month of January. We also received the most snow we've seen in 20 plus years, especially that second winter storm that brought the massive snowfall for the area. And then we also had the warmest winter day we've ever experienced here in Charlotte on record. That was February 20th. We saw 83 degrees. That's the warmest temperature we've ever had during the months of December, January, and February. So it was quite a treat to get that warmer air before temperatures cool back down again to close out the winter season. So again, on this episode of Pinpoint Weather University, we're looking back at the winter season, looking at some of the statistics here. I want to talk about just where this winter ranks. It's going to shock you looking at the average temperature, I think, in regards to where winter ranked when it came down to being the coldest or warmest. Also talking about the big dry spell too. First, let's look back at some of the big days this winter season. We'll start by looking at the warmest day, which was again February 20th. It was the warmest day we ever experienced during the winter months here in Charlotte, 83 degrees on February 20th. And the coldest temperature we had, believe it or not, this winter season in Charlotte, we did not fall into the single digits. Now, it felt like it. We had to bundle up some mornings. There were some mornings where wind chills were in the single digits and even close to below 0 degrees at many spots around the Charlotte area. And there were a lot of outlying spots around Charlotte that did fall into the single digits. I think about Salisbury. I believe it was February 2nd, where Salisbury fell to 1 degree. So 10 degrees, that's the coldest we got here during the winter season in Charlotte. Rainiest, 1.3 inches on February 15th. So broke a few hearts after Valentine's Day. And then the snowiest day, we saw 11 inches. On January 31st, who could forget that again? And also, Kannapolis getting 16 inches. So, Charlotte, just a little bit further south or north, I should say, we could have gotten a little bit more snow than 11 inches. So, it was quite the snowstorm. Looking back at some of that video now, I still can't get over that day. I remember forecasting that morning about 6 to 10 inches of snow. I knew it was going to be a massive snowstorm, but it doesn't really do its justice until you actually see it. Walking outside, I was very shocked that day. I couldn't believe all the snow that we received. It was like just crazy stuff. Driving out in it was scary. Man, talk about some of the significant. This is actually from our photojournalist Brian Christensen right here. He's at the Harris Teeter. People were waving. Some people were trying to get out in it. That was quite the snowstorm. Now, when you want to look at the stats for this winter season, you're probably going to be shocked. We had those back-to-back winter storms, right? We had the ice storm that really wasn't as big of an ice storm as we were expecting, which was good news. We saw spots like Nashville down towards Texas, Louisiana, and Arkansas get hit really hard. But with those back-to-back winter storms, you probably think it's a cold winter. Well, believe it or not, this winter was zero point 0.1 degrees above average. It was zero point 0.1 degrees above the winter season typically where the winter season typically is. 44.3 degrees Fahrenheit, the average temperature. That ranks for the 49th warmest winter on record. And again, you're probably thinking, man, shouldn't we have had some colder temperatures when it comes down to where everything ranked in regards to average temperature? Well, the thing is, we had really warm spells too. Remember when we started winter, December 1st? Again, it's meteorological winter. December, January, February, all grouped into 3-month pairings because whenever we go to astronomical seasons like astronomical winter, astronomical spring, those can change from year to year when it comes down to those dates and times. So, as meteorologists and climatologists, we like to have 3-month group pairings to make sure that we're not necessarily getting off of the data when it comes down to changing data, changing dates and times and things like that. We want more of a consistent data point. That's why we have those 3-month pairings. But when you look at the start of winter in December, we closed it out with the warmest Christmas on record. We had those temperatures in the 70s as we closed out the month of winter or month of December. And that really, really changed things when it comes down to our temperature, right? Because we had that warm spell. Then in February, we had multiple days of 70s and 80s as well. Again, February 20th, the warmest day we've ever seen in the months of January, December, January, and February. So that really changed the game when it came down to temperatures being a lot colder. Now, we did start the winter off very cold, but temperatures were able to pick back up. So when you have those big swings in the temperatures and the higher points and the lower temperatures and the lower points, obviously, you combine all that together, and you kinda just get an average season, although it felt a little bit colder this winter. I also want to look at some of the other stats as well. Precipitation, we did not do so well when it came down to rain this winter, and this is usually our driest part of the year, December, February, and January, or December, January, February, kinda jumbling up the months there. This is typically the driest time, of the year for us here in the Carolinas. Unfortunately, though, we're not supposed to be this dry. Less than 6 inches of rain. That is actually the ninth driest winter we have ever experienced. When you look at the last 3 months, we're some 10 to 15 degrees below where we should be when it comes down to rain. And that is obviously going to be a concern as we head towards the spring months. Snowfall wise, 12.2 inches. It was the 14th snowiest winter we've had. And obviously, that snowstorm we saw on January 31st, that was the biggest snowstorm we had in 2 decades. It had been since 2004 since we saw that much snow. So again, it was a big snowstorm, definitely one to remember. Another storm that you probably won't remember as much from this season was this one here. This was the ice storm slash sleet storm that we received. And again, when it came down to that storm, the big thing that changed that storm was that we saw more sleet that day on January 24th. We were expecting the potential for more freezing rain, and we were probably, I'd say, maybe 2 or 3 hours away from a totally different story here in the Carolinas, especially the Charlotte area. If we received maybe an hour or two of more freezing rain, we would have been talking about more crippling impacts like power outages, down tree limbs, down power lines. But luckily, sleet saved us. Sleet cut into the ice totals. And the thing with sleet, it creates dangerous roadways. Don't get me wrong, the roads get extremely slick when it comes down to sleet, but you're not dealing with sleet leaning on power lines, tree limbs, carrying that weight on rooftops, things like that. So that is why sleet is always a plus when it comes down to winter weather versus ice, because ice just causes more catastrophic issues than sleet does. Sleet keeps you off the roads. Ice possibly keeps you off the roads, keeps you off the power grid, and even concerns for your home as well. When it comes down to roofs, gutters, you get ice jams. Ice just leads to mess. Sleet's messy, but it's not as messy as icy conditions are. That was one thing I wanted to talk about too. Now, that's kind of a recap of the winter season. Just wanted to keep it short. We've got to preview the spring season now coming up. The spring season has started here in the Carolinas. Meteorological spring started on March 3rd or March 1st. So we'll talk about what to expect for the upcoming spring season and also look at if we'll get out of this drought this spring. And if we don't, the threats that come with that. That's all coming up on this edition of Pinpoint Weather University on the other side of the break, my friends. Welcome back into Pinpoint Weather University. I'm meteorologist Brandon Lawson. It's time to preview the spring season. We're seeing the trees bud up. We're also seeing some of the grassy areas green up a bit as well. Unfortunately, though, with the droughts and the drier soils, a lot of our grass might be looking like this, a little bit more brown over the region. So we definitely could use more rain to help things green up even more and bring us more of a brighter picture here in the Carolinas. But overall, if you are not a fan of pollen, you're definitely not going to be a fan of the forecast over the next several days. As temperatures warm up here to close out the week, we get temperatures in the 80s again. That is going to allow pollen levels to really skyrocket here across the Carolinas. On a recent episode of Pinpoint Weather University, I just talked about how pollen season starts during the month of February, but March also is when you start to see those pollen levels skyrocket. So early March, when temperatures start to warm up, tree pollen becomes a massive issue. So if you're allergic to tree pollen, you're going to be sniffling and sneezing here for quite some time. The tree pollen is starting to dominate. It's going to dominate as early as this weekend as we get towards the March 7th weekend. So heads up on that. We're talking about outer, also oak trees as well, juniper trees. So definitely something to start thinking about. Elm trees too. So some things to start thinking about for the spring season. Time to start taking the antihistamines. Those are going to be important. Myself, I am an allergy sufferer and I struggle really bad with allergies. I actually believe I kind of have like what's called allergy induced asthma, where I just can't breathe very well at all when it comes down to allergies. So definitely something to remember here for the next few weeks as pollen levels start to increase with our temperatures rising too. Something else we have to think about, folks. We're going to lose an hour of sleep coming up here Sunday, March 8th. We're going to be tracking less sleep for the area because daylight saving time is going to be kicking in. Your sunrise Saturday on March 7th is going to be 6:44 in the morning. Your sunset comes 6:24 in the evening. Now on Sunday, we're not necessarily gaining an hour of daylight. We're just shifting the sunrise and sunset time. So sunrise on Sunday will be at 7:43 in the morning. Your sunset will come at 7:25 in the evening, which means we'll have a little bit more daylight time later in the evening because we're shifting that sunset time to later in the evening. So should be a lot of fun for the kiddos that don't want to go inside at 6 o'clock. Now they maybe can go inside at 7 o'clock because they'll have a little bit more daylight to play with. I know when I was a kid and daylight saving time would always kick in and I'd always get excited about it because yes, I would be losing an hour of sleep, but it meant more time out with my friends playing football and throwing around the frisbee and basketball quite a bit as we headed towards the spring months. Now, something to think about. Daylight saving time doesn't necessarily directly impact weather, but it does change when we have the coldest time of the day and the warmest time of the day. So the coldest time of the day will now be around 7, 8 o'clock in the morning. So that's when we're going to have our low temperature for the morning now. It was originally happening around 6:30 to 7. Now, coldest time of the day will be 7:30 to 8. And then your warmest part of the day now going to be coming around 4:30 to 5 o'clock versus 3:30 to 4 o'clock. That was when we usually saw our high temperature spike for the day and when temperatures would drop. Now high temperatures will continue to rise until about 4:30 to 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So now we're talking about that being the warmest part of the day. So that's really the biggest thing when it comes down to the weather impacts for daylight saving time. Don't necessarily gain any daylight time from it, but it is something I like to chat about because I think it's important to remember. I also want to talk about the spring season upcoming here in Charlotte. It has been a warming spring, as it has been over much of the country. Spring is continuing to warm. This is a look at a graphic from Climate Central, the nonprofit group studying spring in all seasons all year round. And this looks at a chart that is showing the year 1970 to 2025. So we're looking at how spring has warmed over the last 55 years. And notice that steady trend up. So you see the big line in the middle. That's showing you that mean temperature continuing to rise. And you can kind of see just based on just the up and down motion there. The arrow kind of looks like a heartbeat, but if you notice, the chart's getting higher and higher when it comes down to that heartbeat type look. And that means our temperatures are getting warmer. So we've warmed by about 3 degrees on average over the last 5 decades or so. That's significant. 1 degree is enough. 3 degrees is way too much. Now, Climate Central is saying that 81% of this is due to climate change. Now, how are they calculating that? So we're looking at natural variability as well. That's another thing we look at when it comes down to charts like this. You can't just blame everything on climate change. It doesn't work that way. There's also some natural variability on Earth as well. And our big natural variability that we see during our seasons comes from the El Nino Southern Oscillation, ENSO, or the El Nino or La Nina. You've probably heard of those two before. And again, what happens with those two, it could change the spring seasons for the better when it comes down to warmer air, or difference when it comes down to colder air. So, I mean, again, it could just change the way our temperatures rank because El Nino and La Nina shift how south or how north jet stream can be. And the jet stream is further south. Obviously, you're going to get cooler air. You're also going to get more of an active storm track during the spring season. With an El Nino, you have the jet stream trending a little bit further north, and that allows for a little less storm coverage, and also tends to be more of a warmer setup for us here across the Carolinas. Now, we're not really going to be in either one of those. We're going to be in more of like a neutral setting this time, meaning that we're not going to be necessarily in El Nino or La Nina. La Nina's ending. We might get to more of an El Nino as we get into later in the year. So that's not really going to have an impact on our spring as we go into this upcoming season. So I do want to look at the Climate Prediction Center's map when it comes down to what they're projecting for this winter season, or for the spring season rather. So notice across the US, if you look further north, you've got just a white color there. You even have a little bit of a light blue north of Minneapolis. That's looking at temperatures that are likely going to be right at average or maybe slightly below average for this spring season. Then as you look out west towards the Four Corners region, as you're getting towards Albuquerque, as you're getting towards Las Vegas, that is where you're seeing warmer than normal temperatures. So overall here across the Carolinas, we're looking at likely slightly warmer than normal temperatures this spring season, more of a lighter red shade there. And that lighter red shade is just indicating that we're likely going to see warmer than normal temperatures after we calculate it all at the end of the spring season. This doesn't necessarily mean that the spring season is going to be warm all the way through. Just like we saw with the winter season, we had our highs and lows when it came down to temperatures. That also can happen during the spring season too. Could have a chillier day one day and then a very hot day the next. And then eventually, as you get more in the spring, you just kind of get cooler days because we're not necessarily talking about winter air anymore. So again, when you look at that chart, just because you're seeing slightly above normal temperatures expected for this spring season, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to be above average during the entire months of spring. I also want to talk about this chart too. This is another good chart that Climate Central releases every year, and it's looking at days above normal. How many days do we experience above normal temperatures during the spring months? And when you're talking about days above normal, look at how that chart is also ramping up. So we're experiencing on average 16 more days above average when it comes down to spring days. So, I mean, that's a significant number in itself. I know these numbers don't seem big, but I like to use the example they use over at Climate Central a lot. My buddy Shel Winkley, meteorologist there, always says when your body warms up 1 degree, it doesn't feel very well. Whenever the Earth's warming up 1 degree, it also does not feel very well. So very similar things when it comes down to that too. So something else that you want to chat about, the precipitation. Obviously, we need rain here across the Carolinas. It's a very important thing for us when it comes down to spring because things are growing. Livestock, for farmers raising their livestock, also the concern when it comes down to wildfires. Gardeners obviously need water for their gardens. So there's a lot of different things to think about. Crops. Yeah, I mean, I could go on and on about why rain's important during the spring season. You know it's important. You know we need it. It's something we haven't had in a while. And when you look at the precipitation outlook from the Climate Prediction Center, I'm optimistic. And when I say I'm optimistic, I'm saying, like, I think that we'll see rain on average for the Carolinas. However, I am concerned about if it's going to be enough to get rid of the drought, if that makes any sense. So essentially, spring tends to be one of our wetter parts of the year. And I think we get into more of an active track when it comes down to rainy conditions. But we need to be above average to curb the drought. Remember, we're about 10 to 15 degrees or 10 to 15 inches below where we should be when it comes down to rain. So, if we aren't necessarily getting 5 or so inches of rain above normal for the spring season, you're not necessarily going to be cutting into that deficit at all, if that makes sense. Now, we also don't want all this rain to come down at once. So, when we look over towards the Four Corners region, they are expecting below normal precipitation. As you're getting towards the Great Lakes region, the Ohio Valley, they're expecting above normal precipitation. But as you zoom in a little bit closer to Charlotte, where you have that more whiter or gray shade popping up there, more of that transparent shade, and that is a sign that we are going to be experiencing average, just average precipitation. And unfortunately, when you have average precipitation, that is not necessarily going to be helping you out much when it comes down to a deficit. We need more rain than normal. Unfortunately, I just don't know if that's going to happen this spring, especially being in neutral conditions. Now, I do think we'll see storms. I do think we'll get rainy conditions this spring, like we typically do, maybe even severe weather. It's the spring season. That tends to happen. That's what happens during spring when you have big temperature gradients across the country. When you have big changes in temperature, you tend to get strong cold fronts, and severe weather comes with that. But we don't want a deluge of rain in one day. You don't want 10 inches of rain in 1 or 3 days because that is going to create flooding issues. You want kind of a gradual rain. So, like, let's talk about like a rainy week. I talk about all the time with cutoff lows, areas of low pressure that kind of just they get away from the main flow. So when you're talking about like a jet stream, constant flow around the country. So this is just an example, not even a map that's showing what's happening for this year. Notice how on this map, I'm gonna put my cursor over. You got the jet stream, just a constant flow, constant ribbon in the upper levels across the country here and across the globe, the jet stream. However, what happens when part of the jet stream gets cut off from the main flow? It can kind of just sit in one spot, and that can create a rainy week. That's what we need, kind of a rainy week where it's just raining on and off for 5 or 7 days to help us catch up a little bit when it comes down. That's a look at the spring season. I want to talk a little bit about pollen just for a little bit because I do know it's important. I know a lot of folks are going to be talking about it. That's coming up on the other side of the break here on Pinpoint Weather. We mentioned it earlier in the show, but pollen levels are going to be going up quite a bit as we head towards the upcoming weekend. Welcome back into Pinpoint Weather University. Again, I'm meteorologist Brandon Lawson, and you're looking at maple, alder, and juniper tree pollen this weekend. It is the weekend of March 7th, and unfortunately, pollen levels aren't going to be going down. They're going to stay high all the way through next week. We're talking about pollen levels staying high because temperatures are also going to be staying high. So again, pollen season begins in March, but it can start in February. Peaks in April, though. That's when pollen season's usually the worst because you're getting a mix of tree pollen and also the grass is starting to pick up a bit too. So you're getting that grass pollen as well. Top tree allergens here in the Carolinas, you're talking about oak, hickory, birch, yellow poplar. But again, as you just saw from the previous graphic, oak trees, all alder, juniper trees, things like that also can be a big point when it comes down to tree pollen. And then grass pollen also going to be accelerating a bit as you get closer to the summer months. Start growing your grass out quite a bit. I'm meteorologist Brandon Lawson here on Queen City News Plus. I hope you enjoyed this edition of Pinpoint Weather University. If you're watching, man, tap in with me at WX Brandon 9 on Instagram, also at Fox 46 Charlotte on Instagram. You can tap in with us on there. Let us know where you're watching from. Let us know what topics you're interested in as well. I'd love to hear it. Love to chat with you. I'd love to, even if you tag me in the post, I'd love to repost, tap in with you as well. on social media as we continue to just navigate through environmental, climate, and weather topics together. They're always fun to talk about. And again, I hopefully everybody that watches the show is able to enjoy this and have a good job or have a good time taking in the information here each week. So we'll talk more coming up later on Pinpoint Weather University about pollen, because I do want to try and chat with some folks in Raleigh that actually study pollen here in the Carolinas. They're actually doing the pollen count. So I want to try and get them on and talk more about how they calculate pollen, and also talk about maybe some more wildfire season statistics too as we get more into spring. Talk about our drought increasing during here in the Carolinas. I'm meteorologist Brandon Lawson. Take care of yourself and each other as we navigate this earth together. We'll see you next time.
Queen City News Plus. Just search Queen City News on your smart TV's app store.